Good evening, everyone. My name is Daniel, but tonight, this story isn't just about me. Before I begin, I need you to know what you're about to hear is not just a story, it is real. It is something that changed my life forever. And if you listen closely, it might just change yours too. I was 12 years old when it started. My family had just moved into an old house on the edge of town, the kind of house that looked ordinary in the daylight but carried a strange silence at night. It wasn't long before I started noticing things: the feeling of being watched, the sound of footsteps in empty hallways, doors that were locked suddenly swinging open. But the strangest thing was the humming, a soft, eerie melody that drifted through the house at night. At first, I thought it was my mother, but when I got up to check, the house was dark and everyone was asleep. Then one night, I woke up to find her. She stood in the corner of my room, a girl no older than me, pale and still, watching me with empty eyes. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. She didn't say anything, didn't make a sound, but slowly, she raised her hand and pointed at my closet. I wanted to scream, but the air was heavy, like something was pressing down on my chest. My body refused to move. I squeezed my eyes shut, and when I opened them, she was gone. I tried to tell my parents, but they didn't believe me. "It's just a bad dream," my mother said. "You're imagining things," my father added. But I knew it wasn't just a dream. Every night she returned, standing in the same corner, always watching, always pointing. One night, I finally gathered the courage to check. My hands trembled as I walked toward the closet. The floor creaked beneath my feet. I reached for the handle and pulled the door open. Nothing, just old boxes, a pile of clothes. But then I noticed something strange. The floorboards in the back looked different, uneven, like something had been hidden there. I knelt down, hesitated, then pried them open, and that's when I found it. A small, tattered dress, faded with time, but still stained, and next to it, an old newspaper clipping. My breath caught in my throat as I read the words, "Local girl missing, never found." The face staring back at me from the faded ink was the same girl who had been standing in my room for weeks. I slammed the closet shut and ran. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't sleep for days. But the visits didn't stop. She still came, standing silently in the shadows. But now I understood. She wasn't haunting me. She was asking for help. I placed the dress and the newspaper on my desk that night, and for the first time, I spoke to her. "Who are you?" I whispered into the darkness. The room was still, too still. The air grew heavy, thick like a storm was coming. My lamp flickered, and then I heard it. A voice so quiet, so fragile, it was barely more than a breath. "Help me." The lights went out. The window slammed shut. My heart pounded as I turned toward the mirror and saw her standing right behind me. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Her eyes held something I didn't understand. And then I saw it. Her reflection wasn't in the glass, just me, alone, staring at empty space. But I knew she was there. The next day, I searched her name. I found more than just a missing persons report. I found a story. She was a singer, a girl with a dream, with a voice full of music. But one night, she vanished, and no one ever found her. Until me. She didn't want to haunt me. She wanted to be heard. She wanted to finish her song. That night, I sat at my piano and played the melody I had heard in my dreams. The same eerie tune that had echoed through the house for weeks. And as I played, something changed. The air became warm, the shadows pulled away, and for the first time, I saw her smile. Tonight, I am here to sing, not just for myself, but for her, for the voice that was lost, for the song that was never finished, for the girl who was forgotten. And if you listen closely, maybe, just maybe, you'll hear her too. It started when I was 12 years old. My family had just moved into an old house, the kind with creaky floors, tall windows, and shadows that seemed to stretch further than they should. The house felt wrong, not in the way horror movies show dark, eerie places, but in a way that made the air feel heavier. It was quiet, unnaturally quiet, as if the walls were holding their breath. The first night we moved in, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling like I wasn't alone. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was overthinking. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. At first, it was little things. A whisper when no one was there. The feeling of being watched. Objects shifting slightly from where I had left them. My mother blamed it on the wind. My father on old house noises. But I wasn't convinced. The air carried something different. Something unseen. It was like the house itself was waiting. Then came the humming. Soft at first. A faint tune that drifted through the air at night. So quiet, I thought I was imagining it. But as the days passed, it grew louder. It wasn't coming from a radio. It wasn't my parents or my sister. It was coming from the hallways, from behind walls, from places where no one should be. One night, I woke up suddenly. My room was dark, silent, except for the humming. This time, it was clearer. A melody, slow and sad, like a lullaby. My breath hitched. My pulse pounded in my ears. I turned my head slowly, and then I saw her. She stood in the corner of my room, still, watching. Her hair was long and unkempt, her dress old and tattered, faded by time. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes, they were hollow, as if they held memories, too painful to keep. She didn't move. She didn't blink. She just stared. I tried to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. My body refused to move. I gripped my blanket so tightly, my knuckles turned white. My chest felt heavy, as if the air itself was pressing down on me. Then, slowly, her arm lifted. Her fingers pointed, straight at my closet. I felt an unbearable cold sweep through the room. My breath fogged in the air. The hairs on my arms stood on end. My closet door was closed, but suddenly, it felt like something was behind it, waiting, watching. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. My heart pounded so hard, I could hear it in my ears. And then, she disappeared. No movement, no fading away. 1 second, she was there. The next, she was gone. The room was silent again, but the fear stayed. The cold stayed. The weight in my chest refused to leave. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat up, my eyes glued to the closet door, too afraid to look away, too terrified to close my eyes. The next morning, I told my parents what I saw. My mother smiled, brushing my hair back like she used to when I had nightmares. "It's just a bad dream, sweetheart," she said. "My father didn't even look up from his newspaper. You're letting your imagination get the best of you." But it wasn't a dream, and I knew it wasn't my imagination, because the next night, she came back, standing in the exact same spot, pointing at the closet. Then came the pointing. Night after night, she returned, always standing, always watching, always pointing at my closet. I stopped sleeping. Every night, I lay frozen under my blanket. gripping the edges so tightly my fingers ached. I told myself not to look, not to move, not to breathe too loudly. But I always looked, and she was always there. Some nights, she felt closer, as if she had stepped forward an inch or two. Other nights, the air grew thick, like the room was shrinking around me. But one thing never changed. Her finger, long and pale, always lifted toward the closet door. I started avoiding my room. I would sit in the living room until my mother forced me to bed. I'd turn on every light, play music, anything to keep the silence away. But it didn't matter. As soon as the lights were off, the humming returned. As soon as my eyes adjusted to the dark, she was there. I told myself I wouldn't look again, that if I ignored her, she would go away. But one night, something was different. The air was colder. The house was too quiet. I could hear my own heartbeat, slow and loud in my ears. And for the first time, when I looked at her, she wasn't just pointing. She was staring at me with desperation. It was as if she was pleading, as if I was her only hope. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't ignore her anymore. So I got up. My body was stiff, my hands shaking, my breath uneven. Every part of me screamed to stop, to turn back, to get under the covers and pretend she wasn't there. But something stronger pushed me forward. A terrible, unexplainable pull, like the room itself was guiding me. I reached for the closet door. My fingers wrapped around the handle. The metal was freezing, like it had been sitting outside in the snow. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. I swallowed, took a deep breath, and pulled it open. Nothing, just clothes, boxes, old shoes. My mother's winter coats hung on one side, untouched since we moved in. I exhaled sharply, feeling a small, foolish relief. Maybe I really was imagining it. But then, my foot hit something. The floor beneath the closet felt uneven. A loose floorboard. My pulse spiked. I crouched down, my hands trembling as I pressed against the wood. It gave way with a quiet creak, and beneath it, something was hidden. Dusty fabric, worn, delicate. I pulled it out, my fingers running over the old material, and my stomach twisted. Child's dress, yellowed with age, torn in places, and stained. I swallowed back the bile, rising in my throat. My vision blurred for a second, my hands tightening around the fabric. And then, something else caught my eye. A folded piece of paper. No, not paper. Newsprint. An old, faded newspaper clipping tucked beneath the dress. Brittle at the edges. I opened it slowly, my breath catching as I read the headline, "Local girl missing, never found." And there it was. A photograph. A grainy, black and white image of a little girl, her hair tied in braids, her eyes staring straight ahead. It was her. The girl in my room. The girl who had been standing in the corner, night after night, waiting, watching, pointing. My entire body turned ice cold. My head spun. The article was old, decades old. I scanned through the text, my mind racing. 7-year-old Emily Carter disappeared from her home on November 12th, 1958. No signs of forced entry. Last seen wearing a white dress. The case remains open. A name. Emily. The name of a girl who had vanished long before I was even born. A girl who had never been found. I dropped the dress and stumbled backward, my breath shaky. The walls of my room suddenly felt smaller, the air too thick to breathe. I wanted to run, to wake my parents, to leave the house and never come back. But deep down, I knew the truth. She didn't want to scare me. She didn't want to hurt me. And in my heart, I knew they had. We all had. Emily had been here. and for the first time in decades, she had finally been heard.